Welcome back to The Exchange. A new NBC News poll shows America is divided on Doge. Of the 1,000 voters polled between March 7th and 11th, 41% view Doge positively, 47% are negative. As for Musk himself, 39% positive to 51% negative. Now, as for the question of federal workers, 49% of Americans view them positively. That's a marked decline from the 63% clocked in January of 2019. And 21% of voters have a negative view. Well, my next guest is out with a new book showcasing federal workers. It's called Who is Government? The Untold Story of Public Service. And joining me now is New York Times bestselling author Michael Lewis. Michael, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
When did this book get in the works exactly?
You know, it looks like it's a response to the Trump administration, but in fact, a year ago, I'd been so smitten with just the quality of the material, like what was going on in the government. I wrote a book called The Fifth Risk about the first Trump administration, that I grabbed 6 writers and kind of dropped them into the government, just said, find a story. Like, it doesn't matter what it says, find what interests you. There are 8 pieces in the book. I did 2 of them. And it was all a kind of like, it wasn't specifically a response to Trump. It was more a response to like this whole conversation that takes place about the government. And it gets with a very broad brushes, like deep state and bureaucracy and waste and fraud and abuse. And no one ever bothers to go find out who these people are and what they're doing. And when you actually dig into it, it's much more interesting.
The fact that you had this idea a year ago, could you have just told us all? Then you clearly predicted everything. How could you predict Doge before? So you must have been then watching Doge going like, I have this book coming out that's literally going to give the respect. Now, let me just ask you this, and these stories are incredible. There's the guy who was going to be a priest and now is in charge of the national cemeteries, the mine worker, the guy at the IRS. I mean, there's so many fabulous stories here. What would you say, though, to people who read the book and they go, that's great that these people are as amazing as they are, but we all know that probably doesn't describe everyone throughout the government? So
I'm sure it doesn't. Like, I'm sure in a $7 trillion enterprise, there's some waste. But in some cases, it's not people, it's teams. And in every case, it's sort of like almost not quite randomly picked, but picked pretty quickly by writers who had lots of options. I mean, I think that this is you're mistaken if you want to think of the person who goes to work in the federal government as someone who just doesn't want to work. That's the wrong mental portrait. You aren't wrong in saying that like the system they're in is screwed up. Like there's no question that the whole enterprise needs a refresh. But the kind of person who ends up in these jobs is often very mission driven, often not, as opposed to money driven. It's like you're not going to get paid well. They don't actually they're not really looking for attention or fame because they're not going to get it. They're often very kind of risk averse. But they're often, I've now done it in 2 books, story after story of kind of incredible people, in some cases like the best among us. So don't just dismiss the whole thing. I'd say that this tendency to sort of like point at the workers and say, oh, they're the problem, or we're going to vilify them, is exactly the wrong approach to fixing it. It's no question things need to be fixed, but it isn't actually the fault of the civil service. Yeah. It's more the fault of the political process that sits on top of the civil service.
Or people might say it's more kind of by definition a monopoly. None of these people work at the DMV. I'm just saying, I'm sure that you could have found someone who does. But
so the DMV is not the federal government. The DMV is a state government. So I'm sorry. There's a good example of our ignorance of the federal government, right?
You're right.
People
you're right.
think the DMV.
You're right.
I mean, here's another one. I mean, this is just, I'm not here. I don't want to pay taxes any more than the next person. But when I found out what my tax dollar was going to, felt a lot better about it. And it's like there's this notion alive in the land that this is out of control growing workforce. It's actually smaller than it was 50 years ago in relation to the population. It's stuck at 2.3 million public servants for the same population. I mean, there's just like these kind of falsehoods that are thrown around about it. And if you anchor the conversation in specific people doing specific things, it just becomes a different conversation. It just becomes more real.
They might be interested to know, among the profiles, there's you have a paralegal at the Department of Justice, so it kind of talks a lot about caseload and what's happening there. You have a story all about the only non-person profiled in here, near and dear to our heart. You know where I'm going with this. It's the CPI.
He's a great character, and it's another character that's going to lose its job. That John Lanchester, wonderful English writer, and these writers I picked like novelists. I mean, these are not normal journalists, most of them. But he looked at it and he said, like, what does the government do? One of the things our government does is count. And it's written into the Constitution. You can't distribute power unless you count the people, and it's the biggest counting mechanism in the world. And we basically trust the statistics that come out of the government. We take for granted we can get some kind of picture of our society, and he shows just like what a breathtaking assumption that is, how hard it is to construct this index, but also kind of like ask the question, like, what happens if people start screwing with this? Like, if we don't have a picture of the economy? And I think the Trump administration right now, they've already started fiddling on the edges with the mechanism that calculates the CPI. And let us see what they do if it starts to go the wrong direction.
The story of Christopher Mark is, worth the book. I mean, in what his scale of rating the coal mines, it's just such a great story. So let me ask you this, as you sort of step back and take the 30,000-foot view here. You obviously have a concern about what's going on the government side of things. We also have this kind of the arrival of AI. We have the arrival of weight loss drugs. And like every time these things come onto the scene, Michael, I always think to myself, what would the Michael Lewis book be? What would the title be? Or what would the encapsulation of the cultural moment this is bringing us to be? And I don't know if you have any kind of loose strands on those areas yet.
That's a very big question. You ask me what my next book is going to be, and I actually do not know. I do think that what Doge is doing is much more interesting and important than a lot of people think. I mean, because it's almost arbitrarily going in and just whacking away at the government without a whole lot of thought about how to do it, and the effects of that are going to be, I mean, never mind like the damage it does. It's just like, it's interesting. Like what happens when you start removing functions of the federal government that we've just assumed, taken for granted. And it's so there may be a book in that. I mean, Elon Musk would have to invite me to come and watch, I think.
Yeah.
But maybe not. AI, I mean, I don't have an interesting view on AI. I do feel like an awful lot that gets said about it is said by people who are talking their own book. That a lot of people are along it one way or the other, and they want you to be too. I'm sure it's going to have big consequences. I feel a little bit about it the way I felt about the beginning of the internet. It's kind of the social consequences rather than the financial consequences that are most interesting, and that we're spending a lot of time talking about the financial consequences when it's the social consequences that are going to be the story. It
feels to me like the Lewis take is maybe, it could be 5 years off, right? It could be a long time before we really kind of see exactly what's going on. So go ahead.
What I was going to say is that I don't usually I'm not in the game of predicting the future. I really come in after the war has been fought and shoot the wounded.
Yes.
That's more my job. So every now and then I get lucky, like with this book, and seem on top of something, but it's purely by accident.
That's funny you say that, because I just wanted to ask you while you're still here, Moneyball was the moment in many ways which kind of shot you. I mean, obviously you already had fame from Liar's Poker, but Moneyball was really well beyond the financial audience or anything like that. And it really started this whole revolution that you see playing out to this day with analytics in sports. I mean, do you ever look back and think, maybe I shouldn't have given it all that publicity? Or, when you look at the money that's now, the analytics and the way they've changed sports, the money that's now in there, that to me is such an interesting story, right? Like how college sports are being completely upended by, all of these different, the money and the role that's playing, the transfers that you can now do. And so it's not as if to ask you if there's any regret there, but it does feel like sports has moved in a direction that, while as popular as ever, has really turned a lot of people off at the same time.
Are you blaming me for what's happened in sports?
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
I would say this, that like what's happened in sports is the commercialization, is markets happening in sports, which is a little different from the Moneyball story. The Moneyball story is analytics. It's like people figuring out how to value these players, how to value the strategies. And I think actually we'd use a lot more Moneyball just in the society. Just like, I think that Who is Government is a story of like federal people not being properly valued. I mean, all these characters are obviously undervalued, the people in the book, and we don't have a mechanism for assigning value to them. I do think that what's going on in sports is, especially gambling, especially the gambling in college sports. Like, it should just be, this prop bets in college sports should just be banned.
Yeah.
But I think that it is undermining the purpose of sports in the first place. And it's sort of, we're killing the thing we love. And I think at some point, Congress, especially with regard to college sports, is going to have to write some laws, and especially with regard to gambling. Like, my 17-year-old is like getting ads to bet on sports, and all of his friends in his class are betting on sports, and they shouldn't be. It's obviously a problem. I don't think I'm to blame for it.
But
I agree with you. It's a problem. I just don't think it's my problem.
I was gratified to kind of hear you say that, because it does seem a little crazy. All the people that you profiled in this book, Michael, still in their roles. Were any of them affected by layoffs so far?
Oh no, they're big problems. Two of them have quit, but the big one is at the IRS. One of the characters, Jared Koopman, is in the middle of a unit that has, among other things, helped prosecute Binance, but has recovered billions of dollars in like cryptocurrency from fraudulent schemes, and it's a unit that's paid for itself like 100 times over, and he's still there, I'm told, but like the unit's been gutted. That's like they can't do what they were doing before. And my character, Chris Mark, the coal miner, he has been, it's in the air that like, we're going to take away your credit card and we're going to take away your purchasing authority. I think they all feel threatened. And a couple of them, even though they developed quite close relationships with the writers who wrote the stories, are sort of like, I don't want to talk to you now because I'm just going to get in trouble.
I can understand. It's the fact that you started this a year ago, it remains the thing that will stick in my brain the most.
That was lucky.
Yes,
just lucky.
Indeed. It's better, fortune favors the bold or whatever. Michael, thanks very much. Congrats on the book, and appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Michael
DMV
Lewis.
State.
Yeah.
All right.
Michael Lewis is editor of Who is Government. Coming up, shares of Baidu are up